Hello, welcome to MJRRPG, a podcast for tabletop role-playing game reviews, replays, and whatnot. The following narrative replay is for the Call of Cthulhu scenario One Less Grave, the third entry in Type 40's Seeds of Terror series of one-shots. I ran it a while ago with some good people on the Good Friends of Jackson Elias Discord server. It was a wonderfully bizarre little session. If you're a keeper, by all means give this replay a listen, or read it on mjrpg.com. If you're a player, or just don't want to know everything about the scenario ahead of time, you can read or listen to the first spoiler-light section of my review of One Less Grave, also on mjrpg.com. Otherwise, on to One Less Grave. Beneath a blanket of stars only occasionally hidden by wispy clouds, made silver by a bright half-moon, 5 young friends sauntered down the stone-laid street of a small English town. Their singing, joking, and laughing were the only sound at this hour, nearly midnight on All Hallows' Eve, their echoes preceding them to the ancient St. Bartholomew's Church, sitting silent on a hill overlooking the street. Rumor had it, every year on All Hallows' Eve, at midnight, one could commune with the dead from St. Bartholomew's crypt. The insufferable student of poetry, Wilfred Wilf Gosling, recited his dreadful poetry, unmindful of the others very clearly not listening to him, and occasionally brushing the ivory-handled revolver in his pocket, always loaded with a single bullet. The detached student of art, Allison Allie Power, deliberately positioned the others between her and Wilf, and looked up at the stars and moon lighting their journey. The eager-to-please student of poetry, Edward Bunty Bunton, smiled and tried to be noticed, even occasionally risking paying some attention to Wilf's massacring of the English language. Accompanying the 3 students were their 2 companions, the heavy-set professional artist James Jimbo Roxburgh, his walking stick tapping and scratching on the cobbled street, and the fun-seeking bartender Celia Seal Norman, her weaving to and fro growing wider with each pull from her flask. As aspiring romanticists, they thought they could have a go at a séance, have some fun, and undoubtedly get some inspiration for their next works. They entered the graveyard that crept up the hill and encircled the church, silent. Walking up the narrow path between crumbling tombstones, they noted 4 freshly dug graves yet to be filled. Inside the old stone walls of St. Bartholomew's, their hushed voices and footsteps echoed back uncomfortably loudly as they entered the hall, electric torch beams chasing off the cloying darkness. Allie and Seal strayed off to make a lap of the worship hall, while the men walked up the aisle towards the pulpit. Wilf noted that the hymn board displayed the numbers 50, 37, and 57. Jimbo pulled out a hymn book from one of the well-worn wooden pews and flipped to the pages. The songs related to the falling of night and the coming of dawn. Bunty stood at the pulpit, perhaps feeling a surge of excitement at the prospect of being at the head of something. Resting on the pulpit, he found floor plans for the church and crypt, with red ink markings pointing to the cardinal directions and locations of importance, possibly indicating astrological or occultic significance. On their loop of the hall, Allie and Seal first stopped at the apse, partitioned off from the rest of the hall, and gazed up at 6 looming stained glass windows. They depicted 6 seasons rather than the traditional 4. Allie dawdled for a moment, curious, while Seal shrugged, took a pull of whiskey, and sauntered off. She soon found the door down to the cellar and hollered for the others to join her. A spiral staircase led down into the crypt. Torches illuminated the low-ceilinged, T-shaped chamber, shadows splaying out behind stone pillars and a dozen stone coffins. Poking around the crypt, they found a wood door likely to lead outside, digging equipment probably used by a gravedigger, and an alcove with murals stretching across its walls. Jimbo and Wilf shone their torches on the murals, concluding that the 3 walls were to be taken in from left to right. Painted in a late medieval style, the leftmost mural showed a night scene outside a church, where the dead rose from their graves and joined hands with people of different walks of life, while other people buried themselves in the ground. The center wall showed the sun rising over the horizon, and the folk dancing with the dead had shorn their skin, bearing grinning skulls. The final mural showed a silent day, the dead gone and the dancers reduced to unmoving skulls in the dirt, while those that had buried themselves in the first painting dug themselves out from the earth. Jimbo ogled the murals, so brightly painted despite their apparent age, and when he gently brushed it with his fingertips, he decided it must have been retouched, and expertly so. As Wilf tried to turn the murals into some self-important soliloquy, Bunty picked up a dusty hammer from the gravedigger's equipment and sat on the edge of a coffin, hefting the tool. He wasn't sure why, but he felt more comfortable, safer, with the iron in his hands. Midnight was approaching, and already sick of the dust and wanting the fresh night air to breathe out the room, Allie rightly guessed the wood door led outside. A short staircase led up and out to the graveyard behind the church. Allie took a deep breath, then froze. Something wasn't right. She squinted up at the stars, then nearly lost her footing in a wave of vertigo. She didn't know these stars. These stars weren't right. These weren't her stars. They swirled over her, their voices like horns, a song infernally mocking. She closed her eyes to regain her balance, but she could still faintly hear the song. It wasn't coming from above, though, but from in front of her. Slowly, she peeked out between squinted eyelids, looking down the sloping cemetery. People danced between the graves. They held hands, a long circle ringing around the church. Some had horns, tooting that inane tune. Her confusion rose to terror. They weren't people. They had no skin, no flesh. With a cry, Allie rushed back into the crypt and tried to explain what she had seen to her friends. Dead men, stars, dancing, horns. What little the others could understand in her ravings didn't make any sense. Saying as much, Seal swaggered up the steps, waving her hand out at the graveyard as if to say, "See, nothing to see." But she stopped, blinked to clear her whiskey vision. With every hop and twirl, the dancing dead closed on the church. The trumpets sounded in a single blast, the sound wave ear-splitting and mind-breaking, sending Seal scrambling back into the crypt, hiding behind a pillar and draining the rest of her whiskey down her throat in a single long pull. The others all heard the trumpets, cupping their ears against the stabbing notes. When they uncovered their ears, they turned as one to Jimbo, who hummed the tune and bounced on his heels in time with the music. After a moment, he came to his senses and apologized, but he had to fight to not start whistling along with the dread rhythm and keep his legs locked, lest they start up a jig on their own. With the music piping clearly through the wooden door, and Seal backing up Allie's story, the others looked around frantically. Maybe they could wait out the things in the cellar. There were only two ways in. Wilf propped a shovel up against the door, hopefully locking it. Bunty looked back at the coffin he had been sitting on and called over Jimbo, suggesting they hide in the coffins. Together, they slid off the heavy lid, revealing the dusty bones within. The dusty, wriggling bones, rattling against the coffin and reaching to clamber out. With a shriek, Bunty bashed in the skull with his hammer, knocking it back down, and Jimbo slammed the lid back on top. Breathing hard, they listened to its muted scratching and clattering. The racket seemed to come from all around them, growing louder, adding a percussion beat to the music. With ever-growing horror, the group realized the rattling was growing louder. It came from all the coffins. Lids started shaking, slowly sliding open. In perfect unison, all five friends sprinted up the spiral stairs. Upon reaching the church hall, the group rushed towards the main doors, with the exception of Bunty. He stopped, looked around, then ran up to the pulpit and hid beneath it, pulling a tablecloth over the open side. Clutching his hammer tightly and ignoring the splinters digging into his slick hands, he waited, breath held. Seal, the quickest of the bunch, reached the doors first, and outside she saw the jumping and spinning line of corpses, flanked by the corps of trumpeters, quickly approaching the church. She couldn't take it. She had to get out. She had to get home. She sprinted full tilt into the line of corpses, skeletal hands wrapped around her wrists, pulling and twisting her into the dance. Despite her shrieking in terror, Seal found herself being dragged along with uncomfortable ease, as if her bones acquiesced despite her frenzied muscles. Jimbo's cane smashed through the undead skull, and the creature collapsed in a pile of dust and cracked bones. Freed, Seal resumed her flight, dodging past the dancers between her and the gate. With a surge of triumph, she ran to the gate, towards the street. She passed through the gate. She stopped. She blinked. The backside of the church stood high on the hill ahead of her, the carpet of alien stars blazing overhead. A ring of undead dancing in the graveyard. The church's rear gate behind her. She knew then. They couldn't leave. Jimbo, Wilf, and Allie had watched Seal run up to the edge of the gate, then simply vanish. Something clicked in Wilf's head. The murals. The skeletons had rose, danced with the living until they too became only bones. except those who had buried themselves, who arose at dawn. He ran to one of the unfilled graves, throwing himself into it, landing hard on his shoulder. Another great blast of the horns thundered across the graveyard, staggering everyone. Even inside the church, under the pulpit, Bunty almost dropped his hammer and stuffed paper torn from hymn books into his ears. Jimbo stumbled back. Shaking, he took out his pipe and a match, and humming along with the skeleton's jaunty tune, lit it up and started puffing away, hopping from foot to foot, twirling his cane. Allie stared at her giant of a friend as the skeletons reached him, eagerly taking his hands and joining in his skipping dance. Then she heard a voice. Wilf, yelling from his grave, yelling for her to get in one, quick. With a last look at a smiling Jimbo being pulled deeper into the dance, Allie ran for the grave. She hadn't been the only one to hear Wilf's call. From the bottom of his grave, Wilf's rectangular view of the vulgar stars above became obstructed. A grinning skull stared down at him, reaching out to grasp his jacket and start dragging him out. Wilf struggled, unable to break the thing's rock-hard grasp. It tingled with the music, and Wilf felt the tune seeping into his bones. His flesh felt uncomfortable, in the way. He drew his pistol, frantically cocked it, and fired a round point-blank into the skeleton. Had it been a man of flesh and blood, the shot would have killed him. Sans flesh, the bullet harmlessly passed between ribs. The pistol clicked. Only one bullet, of course. Allie tossed herself into an open grave as Wilf was dragged out of his and into the waiting embrace of the dancers. Hearing his screams, though uncomfortably similar to laughs, Allie whimpered and started clawing at the dirt on the edges of the grave, trying to bury herself. Wilf struggled for a time, but at some point he didn't want to anymore. Or more accurately, his bones didn't want to. The terrified commands of his brain be damned. Jimbo had given himself over to the music long ago. Dragged around and around by the skeleton's claws, Wilf and Jimbo's flesh sloughed off away from blood-soaked bones, their glistening skeletons still dancing away the night. The dancers had noticed Seal. With nowhere to turn, she screamed and charged them with swinging fists. His ears full of hymns, Bunty didn't hear the skeletons skipping through the hall. He only noticed when one yanked away the tablecloth and pulled him into an embrace. Allie dug, frantic, the dirt piling on her, only centimeters thick. Would it be enough? Seal and Bunty fought on, skeletons collapsing in heaps, but always more took their place. They swung away, fists cut, slashed, bloody, bones breaking through flesh, until they weren't swinging anymore, but swaying with the dance, their flesh puddled on the ground, shed away by dancing bones. Allie stayed silent, breathing as shallowly as she could, unable to do anything but listen to the music, muffled as it was. She realized she could see light. The music was gone, only an echo in her mind. Digging free and rising from the grave, Allie looked across an empty, untouched graveyard under bright blue skies. She searched the cemetery and the church, but didn't find her friends, nor any bones. Only a walking cane, a hammer, a flask, and an ivory-handled revolver. The last reminders of her friends. In bundled arms, she staggered home. Life didn't go well. She took to whiskey, preferring Seal's old flask, and kept Wilf's gun in her desk. But her fans, of which she grew to have many, adored her dark, macabre works, and her fame lasted after she finally returned to her grave. Thank you for listening. Once again, there is a review of this scenario for you to read or listen to, along with the written version of this replay on mjrrpg.com. If you'd like to run one less grave yourself, you can find links to it on DriveThruRPG and Type40's Patreon in the show notes. Credit and thank you to Cryochamber for use of their album Cthulhu. See the show notes for links to their YouTube and Bandcamp, as well as to Kevin MacLeod for his rendition of Camille Saint-Saëns' Dance Macabre. And do check out the good friends of Jackson Elias, both the podcast itself and the Discord server where this game was played. Until next time, have a good one.